Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking part in this conversation about local homelessness in Leamington, Ontario. So the few things we're going to talk about today are the local housing market and housing affordability, what causes someone to experience homelessness, the local homelessness landscape, homelessness prevention, and what you can do. So first, let's briefly discuss the housing market in Canada. Back in 1994, the federal government canceled new long-term investments in social housing. This meant that provinces were left to pick up the pieces after the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation faced a budget freeze at $2 billion and no longer built supportive housing. This made Canada one of the few developed nations without a national housing strategy until Canada's first national housing strategy was implemented in 2017. This put many vulnerable people at risk of inadequate housing and homelessness. According to a press release from the Advocacy Centre for Tenants Ontario, the decision by the federal government to stop funding new housing units left a noticeable gap in the number of adequate, affordable homes available for low-income people. Between 1985 and 1989, the federal government helped fund 5,356 units of social housing per year. And if Ottawa had continued to fund social housing at that rate, between 1994 and 2013, over 100,000 homes could have been built. The pattern of housing prices in Toronto and Vancouver provides shocking evidence that housing may be becoming too expensive for even middle-income families and individuals. In 2004, for example, both Toronto and Vancouver had average housing prices hovering over $320,000. In only 9 years, that average for Toronto rose to over $500,000, an increase of more than 60%. And in Vancouver, an even more incredible rise in housing prices was seen, with the average unit fetching for over $750,000 by 2013. That's an increase of over 200%. So taking a closer look at the local housing market, let's first turn to vacancy rates and what they look like compared to provincial and national averages. You'll see that for the most part, our rates have fallen in line with provincial trends, with a few outliers on both the high and low extremes. In recent years, we've remained pretty in line with Canada and Ontario, with the exception of 2018, where you'll see that Leamington's vacancy rates fall far below the provincial and national averages. So while our vacancy rates locally have not drastically changed in the past couple of years, we have seen a very different trend in the average rents in Leamington. In fact, from 2018 to 2019, we saw a massive increase in the average rent from $847 to $1,082. And that's a difference of $235 monthly for a one-bedroom apartment. That's an increase of nearly 28% in just 1 year. So what do our local average rent prices mean for rental housing affordability? Local data from 2018 reveals that approximately 47% of renter households in Windsor-Essex are spending 30% of their income or more on rent. And this means that they're living in housing that is not affordable to them. So that's nearly half of our local population that cannot afford the average apartment rent. And it's important to note as well that the most recent rental housing affordability data, which is presented on this slide, predates the 27% increase in the average rent from 2018 to 2019. So this would actually be a larger disparity now. And what's more, households in the bottom third of renters' income distribution, this being households with an income below $23,990 a year, are essentially entirely priced out of the rental market, with only 10% of available units affordable to them. So why is this important? The availability of affordable housing is a key driver in addressing homelessness. We do have a lack of affordable rental housing in our area, particularly in the county. In fact, data from 2019 tells us that the gap in affordable rental housing supply was almost $11,000 2 years ago and is growing. That same data set tells us that, in addition to this gap, we would need thousands more rental units in Windsor-Essex to fill it. So many people ask what causes homelessness, and it's a good question, but the real question we need to be asking is what has happened to people that creates barriers for them securing and maintaining housing. This approach recognizes that the root cause of homelessness is trauma. Quite simply put, people experience bad things and have varying degrees of ability to process what has happened to them. Some of the factors that determine our ability to respond to a trauma include whether or not we have support from family or friends, whether or not we have enough money to make ends meet, and whether or not we can access mental health and primary healthcare services. So what the literature is very clear in explaining to us is that homelessness is rooted in trauma. And because people do not have the supports they need to process their trauma, they may experience homelessness. So for this reason, it's very important that when we try to support someone experiencing homelessness, we always employ a trauma-informed service delivery approach. So this approach means that we do not judge. We recognize that it's important for the person to have as much control as possible in making decisions about what help they will or will not receive. And it means looking at reducing harm to the person and asking them to answer the question, tell us what happened. So a variety of different factors can contribute to an individual's experience of homelessness. Often people experience homelessness when all other options have been exhausted and/or they are dealing with circumstances that make it difficult to maintain housing. So some of the obstacles that may lead a person to their experience of homelessness include eviction, the affordable housing crisis, family breakdown, domestic violence or abuse, loss of employment, or coping with mental illnesses or addictions, which can make it difficult to maintain independent housing. So when we discuss the circumstances that can lead an individual into homelessness, it's important to consider their interactions with our systems and institutions. First, let's take a closer look at housing loss through interaction with our healthcare system. 1% of Windsor-Essex's homeless population enters homelessness through hospitalization. These are folks who now have nowhere to go upon leaving the hospital and are discharged into the shelter system. 1% may not seem significant, however, any percentage value still represents individuals who are entering homelessness, and that alone makes the number important. So next, we see that 10% of housing loss can be attributed to interaction with the justice system through incarceration. These are individuals who are entering homelessness after leaving the prison system, which presents a number of challenges and barriers on its own. Finally, 36% of Windsor-Essex's homeless population experience housing loss through the child welfare system. So that's over 1/3. Homelessness through interaction with child welfare can occur for any number of reasons due to the complexity of home dynamics. However, when the number is this statistically significant, it's important to critically think about where there might be gaps to fill within our service systems. So here's an age and family breakdown of homelessness in Windsor-Essex that we'll just kind of breeze over really quickly. But within the homeless population, 65% of individuals are single adults, 5% are couples, 19% are youth, and 11% are families. And so when looking at homelessness among key demographics in Windsor-Essex, it's important to consider how marginalized individuals might be disproportionately impacted by housing insecurity and homelessness. So within Windsor-Essex's general population, individuals identifying as Indigenous make up 2.5% of our population, and those identifying as Black or African Canadian make up 3.6%. However, these marginalized identities make up 18% and 9.6% of our homeless population, respectively. So that's a near 20% gap. And this tells us that there are deep-seated barriers that exist for racialized people's housing conditions, including housing affordability, stability, safety, and security of tenure. When the data shows imbalances like this in the homelessness service system, it's important to have an intersectional approach to addressing homelessness in order to ensure that everyone is served with equity. Navigating the homelessness experience in the county is vastly different from homeless life in the city. With no shelter or emergency housing options available, those who don't have friends or family to stay with are left without a reliable place to seek shelter in the immediate area and a lack of transitional units or affordable housing options. Also primarily located within the city are most direct homelessness services, which have limited outreach capacities in the county. And this makes it difficult for people to access the supports that they need. What's more is that the inaccessibility of transportation to and from the city adds another barrier to accessing homelessness services and shelter. With support systems, jobs or school, and other elements of a person's everyday life being located in one area, how can we expect people to move 45 minutes away from their entire lives without a reliable way to get back and forth? This is just a glimpse at the gaps and barriers to accessing supports that exist for those experiencing homelessness in the county. So in Leamington, a large portion of our homeless population are living in hidden homelessness. Hidden homelessness can be defined as living temporarily with others, but without guaranteed of continued residency or immediate prospects for accessing permanent housing. This includes those who are couch surfing, which means staying with friends, family, or sometimes even strangers, who are incarcerated with nowhere to go once released, who are living in cars, abandoned buildings, church properties, or in hotels or motels, and so much more. And on a macro level, data collected from those who are visibly homeless makes up 20% of the homeless population, where an estimated 80% are living in hidden homelessness. So this number is even higher in rural communities like Leamington. And on a micro level, our understanding of those who experience hidden homelessness, their unique lived experiences, and day-to-day lives is also limited. The data we do have suggests that this population often does not use traditional homelessness services. So some factors include an unease with the shelter environment, feelings of pride, as well as a desire to conceal themselves from society due to the social exclusion they're subjected to. And so among this group, women and youth are more likely to experience hidden homelessness as they are less likely to seek out shelter services. So if we look at Windsor Essex as a whole, we can pull data from the 2018 point in time count. The PIT count is a national initiative to measure homelessness, wherein trained volunteers were placed throughout the community to survey and count individuals, families, and youth experiencing homelessness. The volunteers surveyed people experiencing homelessness in shelters, on the streets, and at other community service agencies that support individuals who are homeless. And a few important findings from the 2018 PIT count were, on any given night, 208 people experience homelessness in the Windsor Essex area. 74% of respondents, so just under 3/4 of respondents, had experienced homelessness for the first time between ages 13 to 18, meaning that they experienced it for the first time as youth. 13% of those had experienced 6+ months of homelessness in the past year, and they also experienced 3 or more separate episodes of homelessness, demonstrating a cycling of housing and homelessness scenarios. And 64 single adults were identified as experiencing chronic homelessness, which is continuous homelessness for 6 months or more. So what does homelessness look like in Leamington? As it stands, there's a lack of reliable data on homelessness in the county as a whole. A large portion of our homeless population being hidden, coupled with a lack of coordinated resources, means that these individuals often don't connect with the right people to be counted or considered in standard data collection methods. And when we think of innovative solutions to homelessness and housing insecurity in Leamington and possible future grants and funding opportunities, the one key ingredient that's missing is reliable local data. In order to best serve unhoused folks and those at risk of homelessness in our community, a stronger understanding of the data and perspectives of those with lived experience in Leamington is crucial. So this is why the Leamington Homelessness Committee organized a surveying initiative for individuals who are experiencing housing insecurity or homelessness to share their experiences. Not only will this allow us to better understand the landscape of homelessness in Leamington in terms of numbers, but it will also shed light on the gaps and barriers to exiting homelessness in Leamington. So surveys were happening for a full week in mid-July, and we surveyed over 60 people, which the results are still being rolled up as we speak. And then we'll be analyzing the data we've collected for a final report to inform the project's recommendations for a Made in Leamington solution to homelessness. Now that we've discussed lofty goals of ending homelessness, let's talk about the cost of homelessness. You can see that investing in ending chronic homelessness makes good economic sense. The 3 most expensive forms of housing would be a hospital bed, followed by incarceration, then emergency shelter. And the reality is, many people who experience homelessness do spend significant amounts of time within these systems. So you can see from this slide that investing in social housing is a very affordable option and on average costs less than $200 a month to house someone. So you see, people that experience prolonged periods of homelessness in their life, we would define this type of homelessness as chronic, use 60% of our social service system resources. If we can actually serve people earlier and better, not only can we decrease cost, but research shows that preventative measures and early intervention for homelessness are more effective in keeping people out of precarious housing conditions in the long term. So what does homelessness prevention look like? First and foremost, it means moving away from a homelessness service model that puts emergency response at the center of its service delivery. It aims to move towards a system that puts preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place at the forefront. Of course, within a homelessness prevention model, there are still always going to be those who experience homelessness at some point in time. However, the goal is that this number is significantly lower. For those who do slip through the cracks, an ideal system would have emergency responses in place with a focus on accommodation and wraparound supports. So we discussed what causes homelessness a bit earlier, but let's unpack that idea a bit further. For any given individual, homelessness is usually the result of the cumulative impact of a number of factors rather than one single cause. These factors and the interplay between them not only help us understand the factors that put people at risk of homelessness, but also point to where our preventative efforts must lie. So looking at this first circle on the left, so first, structural factors are broad systemic, economic, and societal issues that affect opportunities, social environments, and outcomes for individuals. So this can include things like poverty, discrimination, a lack of affordable housing, and the impact of colonialism on Indigenous peoples. So next, systems failures can contribute to homelessness through inadequate policy and service delivery. This occurs when individuals and families experience barriers to accessing public systems, failed transitions from institutions, and gaps within nonprofit sectors and agencies. And then finally, individual and relational factors refer to the personal circumstances that place people at risk of homelessness. So this includes things like crises, housing insecurity, interpersonal and relational problems, trauma, and persistent and disabling conditions. So what does all of this mean in terms of addressing homelessness through prevention methods? Understanding the risks and causes of homelessness provides a starting place to consider where legislation, policy, and practices can contribute to prevention. Rather than a top-down approach, government and institutions must support local and community-based services to implement interventions for those at risk of homelessness and adapt and implement policy based on local needs and context. The relevant community-based service providers that can impact homelessness prevention exist both within and outside of the homelessness sector. In countries that have had the greatest success with homelessness prevention, specific prevention interventions are embedded within broader models of system integration, where all orders of government play a role, where the drivers of homelessness are addressed, and where collaboration between different departments and institutions is not only desired, but necessary. So why is it important to talk about homelessness? Without a safe and stable place to call home, it's impossible for an individual to meet their basic physiological needs of food, water, warmth, and rest, as well as their safety needs. Housing is absolutely a basic need, and when it goes unmet, it presents insurmountable barriers for meeting the other needs in a person's life. So once we understand housing as a basic need, we can acknowledge it as a right that everyone should be entitled to. So next, let's take a minute to debunk some of the myths around homelessness that exist. So the first myth we'll explore is that people choose to be homeless, when the fact of the matter is that a variety of different factors can contribute to an individual's experience of homelessness, as we mentioned before, mainly rooted in trauma. Myth number 2 is that people experiencing homelessness should just find a job. And the fact of the matter is that there are people who are already experiencing homelessness who are employed. However, it's much more difficult to find a job while experiencing homelessness. A number of different challenges, such as lacking a permanent address, not having regular access to showers, barriers to transportation, and other difficulties like mental illness make it difficult to obtain employment. And even when individuals experiencing homelessness do find jobs, they are often part-time or minimum wage positions, and this work fails to adequately meet their needs due to expensive housing costs. So the third myth we'll explore is that all people who experience homelessness are addicts. The fact of the matter is that many people who experience homelessness do not struggle with substance abuse problems or addictions. Just like in the general population, only a percentage of those who experience homelessness deal with addictions. People experiencing homelessness may deal with other issues related to their experience of homelessness, including trauma and mental illness, for example. That being said, for those who do live with addiction and or are in recovery, it is extremely difficult to stay clean while living in homelessness. And myth number 4 is that people experiencing homelessness are lazy, when the fact of the matter is that in order to survive, many people who experience homelessness are constantly in search for the necessities of life, such as food, shelter, and a source of income. Therefore, due to the barriers that they face, many people experiencing homelessness do not have the option of being stagnant or lazy. For example, searching for a job becomes even more challenging when an individual does not have access to a phone, computer, or a fixed address on a regular basis. So now that we've neared the end of the presentation, some of you may be wondering what you can do or what steps you can take in your everyday life to address homelessness. So we've listed a few small things that you can do here. So the first thing you can do is you can follow along with the Leamington Homelessness Awareness Campaign on the South Essex Community Council's social media pages. So I've linked our introduction video there for you to watch, and you can find a lot more content about homelessness and housing in a broad context and also a local context on our social media pages. So you can also donate food, clothing items, or camping supplies to organizations working with those who are experiencing homelessness or to the food pantries. So another example is St. Michael's Parish does collect homelessness emergency supplies. So you can reach out to Deacon John there if you're interested in making a donation to find out what they may need. And then a third suggestion is to advocate to local representatives at all levels of government, so federal, provincial, and municipal, for homelessness prevention initiatives, affordable and supportive housing. And so that concludes our presentation on local homelessness in Leamington. So thank you for being so attentive and listening along with me. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me, Alyssa, at ans@secc.on.ca. I've included my email in this slide as well for your reference. But yes, I'd love to chat more about housing and homelessness or answer any other questions you have coming out of this presentation. And then we'd also love your feedback. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to fill out the survey that's linked at the bottom of this slide. I'm hoping that the host can also include it in the chat so it's easily accessible for you all. But I would really appreciate any feedback you have on the presentation. And so with that, thank you so much. I hope you all learned a little something new about homelessness in a broad sense or in a local context. And yeah, thank you for looking to engage in a conversation about homelessness in Leamington.